The frost clung to the metal hull as Lieutenant Alfred Rose climbed into the turret of his M36 Jackson on the morning of December 1st, 1944. The landscape near the Belgian-German border stretched before him in rolling farmland, interrupted by the skeletal remains of trees and the occasional stone farmhouse. His crew was stationed with the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion, part of the 12th Army Group pushing toward the Rhine. Rose wasn't expecting much action that morning. He'd been familiarizing himself with the turret controls, running his hands over the traversing mechanism, checking the 90mm gun's elevation. The Jackson was new to their unit, arrived only weeks earlier in September, and crews were still learning its capabilities. Then, through the magnification of his telescopic sight, Rose spotted something that made his breath catch. At an almost impossible distance, perhaps 2.5 miles away, a German Panther tank sat stationary on a distant ridge. The massive silhouette was unmistakable, its long gun barrel extending forward, the characteristic sloped armor gleaming dully in the weak winter light. Rose knew what every American tanker knew. The Panther was death incarnate. German propaganda had spent months building the mystique of these 45-ton predators. Intelligence briefings warned that Panthers could destroy 5 Shermans before being knocked out. British commanders feared them. Soviet reports described them as nearly invincible from the front. The numbers backed up the reputation. The Panther's 75mm gun could penetrate any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Its frontal armor, 80mm thick and sloped at 55 degrees, was effectively immune to most Allied anti-tank weapons at normal combat ranges. But Rose had something the German commander didn't know about. His M36 Jackson mounted a 90mm gun, a weapon adapted from anti-aircraft artillery and married to the reliable Sherman chassis. The German tanker sitting in that Panther, confident in his superiority, operating under doctrine and training that told him Allied armor couldn't touch him at this range, had no idea what was about to happen. Rose called out the range. 4,600 yards, 2.61 miles. The gunner looked at him with disbelief. That distance exceeded most tank engagement ranges by a factor of 6. The average tank battle in Europe occurred at less than 800 meters, but Rose had studied his sight reticles. He'd trained on this gun. He fired 2 ranging rounds, adjusting for distance and wind. On the third shot, the armor-piercing round left the muzzle at over 3,000 feet per second. 4 seconds later, 2.5 miles away, it struck the Panther's turret. The German crew never saw it coming. They had no idea that American tank destroyers now possessed weapons capable of penetrating their vaunted armor at distances they considered absolutely safe. Rose kept firing, alternating between armor-piercing and high-explosive rounds until the distant Panther began to burn. This single engagement represented something far more significant than one remarkable kill. It embodied a fundamental shift in armored warfare that German commanders were only beginning to comprehend in the winter of 1944. For 2 years, German tank crews had operated under assumptions about Allied capabilities that were about to be systematically shattered. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. To understand what made this moment so significant, we must go back to the spring of 1942, when American ordnance engineers first confronted a disturbing reality. The standard American tank destroyer, the M10 Wolverine, mounting a 3-inch gun, was becoming obsolete before it even reached mass production. Intelligence reports from North Africa showed that German tank design was evolving rapidly. The Panzer III and IV, which American weapons could handle effectively, were being supplemented by something new, something far more dangerous. The Tiger tank had entered production in August 1942. Weighing 55 tons and mounting an 88mm gun, it represented a quantum leap in armored warfare capability. The Tiger could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at 1,800 meters. A Sherman's 75mm gun couldn't penetrate a Tiger's front armor even at point-blank range. But the Tiger was expensive and complex to produce. German industry would manage only 1,349 units by August 1944. The real threat, American intelligence officers began to realize, would be something different. Something cheaper to produce in larger numbers while still dramatically outclassing Allied armor. In September 1942, even before American units encountered Tigers in combat, engineers at the Ordnance Department began examining the potential of a new tank destroyer armed with a 90mm gun. The timing proved prescient. The initial designs, designated T-53 and T-53E1, were disasters. Too rushed, too compromised, they were cancelled before reaching production. But the concept was sound. American forces needed a mobile platform capable of engaging heavy German armor at extended ranges. The answer came in October 1942, when engineers tested mounting the experimental 90mm gun T7 into the turret of an M10 tank destroyer. The gun itself had an interesting pedigree. Developed originally for anti-aircraft use, the 90mm gun combined high muzzle velocity with good armor penetration characteristics. The M3 variant, mounting a barrel 70 calibers long, could propel an armor-piercing round at over 3,000 feet per second. Ballistic tests showed impressive capabilities. The M82 armor-piercing capped shot could penetrate 129 millimeters of armor, angled at 30 degrees from vertical at 500 yards. At 1,000 yards, penetration remained strong at 122 millimeters. For specialized ammunition, the T-30E16, high-velocity armor-piercing round with a tungsten core, could punch through 221 millimeters at 500 yards and 199 millimeters at 1,000 yards. The numbers were impressive on paper, but transforming those numbers into an operational weapon system would prove challenging. The 90mm gun weighed substantially more than the M10's 3-inch gun. Mounting it in the M10's existing turret proved impossible. The gun's weight would throw off the turret balance and overstress the traverse mechanism. Engineers needed to design an entirely new turret with power traverse and a massive counterweight to balance the gun's weight. The first two prototypes, designated 90mm gun motor carriage T-71, were completed in September 1943. Initial testing showed promise. The vehicle was lighter and more agile than a standard Sherman M4A3, despite mounting far heavier armament. The turret design was revolutionary. Unlike the M10's angular welded armor, the new turret used thick cast armor with front and side slopes. A large bustle extended from the rear of the turret, serving dual purposes as counterweight and ammunition storage. 11 rounds could be stowed in the hollow counterweight, with 36 more in the sponsons. Total ammunition capacity was 47 rounds of 90mm ammunition. Army Ground Forces approved the project in October 1943, but production authorization came slowly. Staff officers questioned whether deploying a specialized 90mm tank destroyer was necessary when the same gun was being studied for use on tanks. The tank destroyer force itself had reservations about rushing another design into production after the T-53 fiasco. Testing continued through the winter of 1943 into spring of 1944. On July 5, 1943, at the Battle of Kursk, German forces committed 200 Panther tanks to Operation Citadel, Hitler's massive offensive against the Kursk salient. The Panther had been developed specifically to counter the Soviet T-34, which had shocked German armor forces in 1941. The T-34's combination of sloped armor, wide tracks, powerful gun, and excellent mobility had shattered German assumptions about armored superiority. German designers created the Panther to reclaim that superiority. On paper, the Panther looked formidable. Its 75mm Qua-42 gun, 70 calibers long, could penetrate 138 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. The frontal armor consisted of an 80mm plate sloped at 55 degrees, creating effective thickness equivalent to 140mm of vertical armor. The Maybach HL-230 engine delivered 700 horsepower, giving the 45-ton tank excellent mobility. The interleaved road wheel suspension provided a remarkably smooth ride even over rough terrain. German crews went into battle believing they operated the most advanced tank in the world. The reality at Kursk proved different. Of 184 Panthers committed on day one, only 38 remained operational after 1 week. The rest had been lost, primarily to mechanical breakdown rather than enemy action. Transmissions failed, final drives shattered, engines overheated and caught fire, fuel pumps leaked, creating catastrophic fire hazards. The sophisticated machine that looked so impressive in factory tests collapsed under the stress of combat operations. German commanders quickly learned that Panthers required elaborate procedures to keep operational. They were transported by rail even for distances as short as 25 kilometers to preserve engine and drivetrain life. Drivers received special training emphasizing gentle operation. Sudden acceleration was forbidden. Turns had to be gradual and carefully planned. The tank that was supposed to dominate battlefields instead dominated maintenance schedules. But American intelligence officers in late 1943 didn't know the full extent of Panther's mechanical problems. They knew only that German forces had deployed a new tank with fearsome capabilities. Reports from Soviet forces confirmed the Panther's excellent gun and strong frontal armor. British intelligence assessments, based on limited encounters, emphasized the threat. American tank crews began hearing stories about this new German predator that could kill Shermans from distances where Shermans couldn't fight back. The psychological impact was significant even before American units encountered Panthers in combat. The first American-German Panther encounters came in Italy during the summer of 1944. British forces captured an intact Panther near central Italy in July. The tank had been abandoned, not due to combat damage, but mechanical failure. Its engine had overheated. Oil leaked from multiple gaskets. Fuel lines showed seepage. The cooling system had failed despite the engine running well below maximum power. British engineers managed to get the captured Panther operational enough for transport to Britain for comprehensive testing. What they discovered would prove valuable, but that information would take time to disseminate. Meanwhile, in the United States, the T-71 prototype received its official designation on June 1, 1944. The 90mm gun motor carriage M36 entered production. An initial order for 300 vehicles was issued, with General Motors' Fisher tank arsenal converting the last 300 M10A1 tank destroyers. These conversions, taking place from April to July 1944, involved removing the 3-inch gun turrets and installing the new 90mm turrets. The process proved time-consuming but necessary. American forces needed weapons capable of engaging Panthers and Tigers effectively. Then came Normandy. When Allied forces landed on June 6, 1944, they confronted German armor in terrain that favored defenders. The bocage country of Normandy, with its high hedgerows, narrow roads, and limited visibility, created perfect ambush conditions. German tank doctrine emphasized using Panthers defensively, positioned in hull-down positions where they could engage Allied armor at maximum range while exposing minimal profile. The combination of superior gun range, strong frontal armor, and defensive positioning made Panthers devastatingly effective. American tank crews quickly learned to fear Panther engagements. A Sherman might spot a Panther at 500 meters, maneuver to engage, and be destroyed before closing to effective range. The Sherman's 75mm gun simply couldn't penetrate Panther's frontal armor beyond 300 meters under most conditions. Even the improved Sherman mounting a 76mm gun struggled against Panther frontal armor. Tank destroyer units equipped with M10 Wolverines found their 3-inch guns inadequate against Panthers past 500 meters. The M18 Hellcat, fastest tank destroyer in the American arsenal, mounted a 76mm gun that faced similar limitations. Reports flooded back to Eisenhower's headquarters. American armor was outgunned. German Panthers were wreaking havoc on Sherman units. Something had to be done. On July 29, 1944, the M36 production contract was increased from 600 to 1,400 vehicles. The urgency was palpable. American forces needed these tank destroyers immediately. The problem was production capacity. Only 913 M10A1 hulls could be requisitioned from training units for conversion to M36 standard. Engineers improvised. They decided to mount M36 turrets onto M4A3 Sherman hulls, creating the M36B1 variant. 187 of these conversions were produced from October to December 1944 and rushed to Europe. The first 40 M36S shipped overseas in September 1944. They entered combat in October. American tankers and tank destroyer crews received the new vehicles with enthusiasm. Here, finally, was a weapon that could engage German heavy armor on more equal terms. The 90mm gun gave American forces reach and penetrating power they'd lacked. But the M36 came with limitations. Like all American tank destroyers, the turret was open-topped as a weight-saving measure. This design choice provided excellent observation and reduced vehicle weight, improving mobility. It also left the crew vulnerable to artillery airbursts, mortar fragments, and infantry grenades. The massive muzzle blast from the 90mm gun obscured vision and reduced rate of fire during initial combat. Crews complained that after firing, the smoke and blast effects made it difficult to observe the target and adjust aim. Engineers responded quickly, developing a double-baffle muzzle brake that was installed on all M36S beginning in November 1944. The modification significantly reduced muzzle blast and improved crew efficiency. Tank destroyer doctrine called for these units to be held in reserve, brought forward to engage emerging armor threats. The M36 fitted this doctrine perfectly. Its speed, derived from the Sherman chassis and Ford GAA V8 engine delivering 450 horsepower, allowed rapid deployment to threatened sectors. The 90mm gun gave it standoff capability to engage German armor before Panthers could close to their preferred fighting ranges. German tank commanders, however, received no updates about this new American weapon. German military intelligence focused primarily on the Eastern Front, where the vast majority of German armor was committed. Intelligence assessments of American capabilities remained outdated, based largely on encounters with Shermans and M10 Wolverines. German training manuals and tactical briefings emphasized Panther's superiority over Allied armor. Tank commanders were taught that their frontal armor was effectively invulnerable at combat ranges exceeding 500 meters. Their gun could engage and destroy Allied tanks well beyond 2,000 meters. This created a tactical mindset, a confidence bordering on arrogance. Panther crews operated under established procedures designed to maximize their advantages. They positioned themselves hull down in defensive positions, exposing only the turret and gun. They engaged Allied armor at maximum range, using their superior optics and long gun reach to destroy targets before Allied tanks could effectively return fire. When forced to maneuver, they maintained distance, refusing close-range engagements where Allied numerical superiority and maneuverability could overwhelm them. This doctrine had proven effective throughout summer and fall of 1944. German armor forces, though badly outnumbered, inflicted disproportionate casualties on Allied tank units. But doctrine and training are only as good as the intelligence they're based on. German commanders assumed they understood Allied capabilities. They knew about Shermans with 75mm and 76mm guns. They knew about M10 Wolverines with 3-inch guns. They knew about M18 Hellcats with 76mm guns. All of these weapons had known limitations against Panther armor at extended ranges. What German intelligence didn't know, what German tank commanders weren't briefed on, what Panther crews operating in the field had no reason to suspect, was that American tank destroyer battalions were now fielding a weapon that fundamentally changed the tactical calculus. The M36 Jackson's 90mm gun could penetrate Panther's side armor at 1,000 yards. It could penetrate the turret armor at even greater ranges under favorable conditions. The tungsten core high-velocity armor-piercing rounds, when available, could defeat Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. Most importantly, the M36 could engage Panthers at distances where German crews believed themselves safe. This intelligence gap created a fundamental vulnerability. Panther commanders positioned their tanks based on assumptions about Allied weapons ranges that were no longer accurate. They accepted positions and engagement ranges that would have been suicidal had they known about M36 capabilities. The psychological impact of this intelligence failure cannot be overstated. For German tank crews who had operated for months believing in their superiority, who had been taught that Allied armor couldn't threaten them beyond 500 meters, the sudden appearance of American tank destroyers capable of destroying Panthers at 1,000 yards or more was devastating. It shattered their tactical confidence. It forced doctrine changes. It created fear where there had been certainty. Lieutenant Johann Richter sat in the commander's position of his Panther OSF G, scanning the frozen landscape near Bastogne through his commander's cupola. It was December 16th, 1944, the opening day of Operation Wacht am Rhein, what history would remember as the Battle of the Bulge. Richter's unit, the 2nd Panzer Division, was part of the massive German offensive aimed at splitting Allied forces and capturing the port of Antwerp. The morning fog provided excellent cover as his company moved through the Ardennes forest. Richter felt confident. His crew had survived the summer fighting in Normandy, retreated across France, and now they were going back on the offensive with a properly maintained tank, adequate fuel, and clear objectives. The Panther beneath him represented the latest production variant, incorporating improvements learned from 2 years of combat experience. The final drive issues that had plagued early models had been partially addressed. The engine cooling system worked more reliably. The gun mantlet had been redesigned to eliminate the shot trap that could deflect incoming rounds down into the thin hull roof armor. Richter's tank was as good as German engineering could make it in late 1944, but it carried a vulnerability that neither he nor his crew understood. German tactical intelligence in December 1944 remained dangerously incomplete regarding American tank destroyer capabilities. Wehrmacht intelligence officers focused their limited resources on tracking Soviet armor developments on the Eastern Front, where the vast majority of German forces were committed. The intelligence assessments distributed to units in the West contained detailed information on Sherman variants, specifications on the M10 Wolverine, notes on the M18 Hellcat's exceptional speed. What these assessments lacked was any meaningful data on the M36 Jackson. Some intelligence reports mentioned a new American tank destroyer mounting a larger gun, but the reports were vague, unconfirmed, treated as low-priority information compared to more immediate tactical concerns. This intelligence gap stemmed from several factors. The M36 had only entered combat in October, just 2 months earlier. German forces in France had been in near-constant retreat since the Normandy breakout in August. Opportunities to capture intact M36s for evaluation were limited. When panzer crews did encounter M36s in combat, the engagements were typically brief, violent, and often ended with German tanks destroyed or forced to withdraw. Surviving crew reports mentioned being engaged by American armor at unexpected ranges. But in the chaos of retreat, these reports were filed, noted, and largely ignored by intelligence officers, overwhelmed with information from a collapsing front. The result was that Panther crews like Richter's operated under tactical assumptions that were fundamentally flawed. Their training emphasized maintaining engagement ranges beyond 1,000 meters when possible, using their superior optics and gun range to destroy Allied armor before it could effectively return fire. This doctrine worked brilliantly against Shermans and M10s. Against M36s, it was a death sentence. but Richter didn't know that. His training had taught him that Allied tank destroyers with 3-inch guns needed to be close to 500 meters or less to threaten his frontal armor. He believed his Panther's sloped 80mm frontal plate made him effectively invulnerable at ranges exceeding 800 meters. He was wrong. The American tank destroyer doctrine that the M36 was designed to execute differed fundamentally from German armor doctrine, where German forces integrated their tanks directly into combined arms formations. American tank destroyers were organized into independent battalions, designed to be held in reserve and committed at critical points to counter enemy armor thrusts. This doctrine had been controversial since its inception. Many American armor officers argued that mounting the 90mm gun on a Sherman tank would be more effective than creating specialized tank destroyer units. But the tank destroyer force maintained institutional independence, and the M36 represented their philosophy-made steel. Each tank destroyer battalion consisted of 3 companies, each with 12 M36s, for a total of 36 vehicles per battalion. These units were highly mobile, designed to redeploy rapidly to threatened sectors. The M36's speed, derived from its Sherman chassis and powerful Ford GAA engine, allowed rapid movement by road. Crews trained extensively on shoot and scoot tactics, firing from one position, then immediately relocating before German artillery could respond. The open-topped turret, while exposing crews to artillery and small arms fire, provided excellent observation and allowed quick target acquisition. The tactical employment of M36s evolved rapidly during their first months of combat. Initial doctrine called for positioning tank destroyers in concealed positions at road junctions and other choke points where German armor was likely to appear. Crews would wait in ambush, allowing German tanks to approach to point-blank range before opening fire. This doctrine maximized the M36's penetrating power and minimized exposure time. But as crews gained experience with the 90mm gun's capabilities, tactical employment became more aggressive. Commanders discovered that the M36 could engage German armor at ranges previously considered impossible for tank versus tank combat. The telescopic sight, combined with the gun's flat trajectory and high muzzle velocity, allowed accurate fire past 1,000 yards under good visibility conditions. Crews began taking what earlier in the war would have been considered ridiculous shots at distant targets. Sometimes these long-range engagements are missed. Often enough, they hit, and when they hit, they killed. Captain James Burt of the 66th Armoured Regiment experienced this tactical revolution firsthand during fighting near Aachen in October 1944. His unit, equipped with standard M4 Shermans, had been tasked with clearing a series of villages northeast of the city. German resistance was fierce. Panthers and Panzer IVs had been positioned in hull-down defensive positions covering the approaches to each village. Burt's Shermans were being systematically destroyed, attempting to close to effective engagement range. On October 12th, a platoon of M36s from the 771st Tank Destroyer Battalion was attached to Burt's company. The tank destroyer lieutenant, a young officer fresh from training who nonetheless understood his weapons capabilities, suggested a different approach. Instead of attempting to close with the German armor, the M36s would engage from long range, using their superior gun to neutralize German positions before the Shermans advanced. The tactic worked spectacularly. From positions over 1,000 yards distant, the M36s systematically engaged German armor. The first Panther was struck in the turret side, the 90mm round punching through and detonating the ammunition stored in the turret bustle. The resulting explosion blew the turret completely off the hull. The second Panther, attempting to back out of its position, exposed its thinner side armor and was penetrated through the sponson. The third Panther managed to return fire, but at that range, even with its excellent gun, achieving a hit on a partially concealed M36 proved difficult. The German crew fired 4 rounds before an American armor-piercing shot struck the gun mantlet, penetrated into the turret, and killed the crew. Burt was astounded. In his after-action report, he wrote that the M36S had accomplished in 20 minutes what his Sherman company had been unable to do in 2 days of fighting. More importantly, the tank destroyers had suffered no losses. The German Panthers, operating under the assumption that they were safe at 1,000 yards, had been destroyed before they could effectively respond to the threat. This pattern would repeat itself across the European theatre as M36S entered service in larger numbers. By December 1944, when the German offensive in the Ardennes began, approximately 300 M36 tank destroyers were deployed with American forces in Europe. This represented a small fraction of total American armoured vehicles, but their impact far exceeded their numbers. Tank destroyer battalions equipped with M36S were in high demand. Division commanders who had previously viewed tank destroyers with skepticism now requested them specifically. The 90mm gun had proven itself in combat. But the German offensive caught American forces by surprise. The Ardennes sector had been considered a quiet area, held by divisions recovering from combat or newly arrived units completing their training. The massive German armoured thrust, spearheaded by elite SS Panzer divisions and supported by conventional Panzer divisions, overwhelmed American positions. In the opening days of the offensive, German armoured columns achieved dramatic penetrations, surrounding the town of Bastogne and threatening to reach the Meuse River. Lieutenant Richter's 2nd Panzer Division was part of the northern prong of this offensive. His company had specific orders to bypass American strongpoints, maintain momentum, and drive west, toward the Meuse. The morning of December 16th passed in a blur of rapid movement. Resistance was scattered. American units, surprised and overwhelmed, either retreated or were bypassed. By afternoon, Richter's company had penetrated 15 kilometers beyond the initial American lines. Richter felt the intoxication of offensive success. This was how it had been in 1940, in the glory days when German armour had swept across France. Perhaps, he thought, the war could still be won. The illusion shattered on December 18th. Richter's company, advancing along a road through rolling hills, encountered an American blocking position near the town of Mannheim. The Americans had established a hasty defensive line using whatever units were available. Among them was a platoon from the 643rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M36 Jacksons. The tank destroyer crews had been rushed forward from reserve positions, arriving at Mannheim with barely enough time to scout firing positions before German forces appeared. Sergeant William Davidson commanded one of the M36S positioned on a ridge overlooking the approach road. Through his binoculars, he watched the German column advance. He counted 5 Panthers, 3 Panzer IVs, and what appeared to be a company of mechanized infantry in half-tracks. The Germans were moving with the confidence of an army on the offensive, maintaining formation, not expecting contact. Davidson checked his range card. The lead Panther was at 1,400 yards. Too far for a guaranteed hit, but within the M36's effective engagement range. Davidson's gunner, Corporal James Miller, had the Panther centred in his telescopic sight. The range was extreme, but Miller had trained extensively on long-range gunnery. He adjusted for distance, calculated the lead required for the moving target, and waited for Davidson's command. The other 2 M36S in the platoon had acquired targets as well. The tank destroyer lieutenant, observing from a covered position, gave the order to fire. 3 90mm guns fired almost simultaneously. The sound was tremendous, a sharp crack followed by the rushing noise of armour-piercing rounds cutting through cold air. Davidson's round struck the lead Panther in the front glacis plate just to the right of the driver's position. At 1,400 yards, even with the Panther's sloped armour, the kinetic energy of the 90mm round was sufficient. The armour-piercing cap helped prevent the round from shattering on impact. The hardened steel penetrator punched through the 80mm plate, through the internal armoured bulkhead, and into the crew compartment. Lieutenant Richter, commanding the 2nd Panther in the column, saw the lead tank shudder from the impact. Smoke began pouring from the driver's hatch. The Panther slewed sideways, blocking the road. Richter's training kicked in immediately. His company was under fire from concealed anti-tank weapons. Standard doctrine called for immediate dispersal and suppressive fire while locating the enemy positions. He ordered his driver to move off the road, seeking cover behind a small rise. His gunner traversed the turret, searching for targets. But Richter made a critical error born of his training and experience. He assumed the engagement range was typical for anti-tank combat, perhaps 500 to 700 meters. He positioned his Panther to engage what he believed were nearby American positions. In reality, the M36s were firing from twice that distance. Richter's Panther, moving to what he thought was a covered position, remained in clear view of Davidson's M36 at 1,400 yards. The second 90mm round struck Richter's Panther in the turret side, below the commander's cupola. The penetration was catastrophic. The round passed through the turret armor, struck the gun breech, and ricocheted into the turret basket where ammunition was stored. The resulting explosion killed Richter and his gunner instantly. The loader and radio operator, severely wounded, managed to bail out before the ammunition fire spread. The driver, trapped in his compartment by jammed hatches, died when the fuel tanks ruptured and ignited. The German column disintegrated. The remaining Panthers and Panzer IVs scattered, seeking any available cover. The mechanized infantry half-tracks reversed frantically, trying to escape the kill zone. The M36 crews continued firing methodically. A third Panther was struck in the engine compartment and immobilized. A Panzer IV, attempting to return fire, was hit in the turret and destroyed. Within 5 minutes of the first shot, the German company had lost 4 tanks and was in full retreat. The M36s had suffered no damage. This engagement at Mannheim exemplified the tactical advantage that American tank destroyers had gained through the combination of the M36's 90mm gun and German intelligence failures. The German company had been ambushed at a range where their commanders believed they were safe from American anti-tank weapons. Their tactical response, appropriate for combating Shermans or M10s, was completely inadequate against M36s firing from extended range. The psychological impact on surviving German crews was severe. Reports filtered back through German command channels, describing American tank destroyers with devastating new weapons that could kill Panthers at impossible distances. But these reports moved slowly through the German command structure. Wehrmacht intelligence officers, overwhelmed with information from a rapidly deteriorating tactical situation, struggled to compile accurate assessments. Unit commanders on the ground received fragmentary warnings about powerful American anti-tank weapons, but lacked specific information about capabilities, recognition features, or tactical countermeasures. The intelligence gap that had existed in October and November continued through December and into the new year. Meanwhile, American tank destroyer battalions were learning to exploit their advantage. Crews developed tactics specifically designed to engage German armor at maximum range. Forward observers would identify German tank positions and radio coordinates to M36s, positioned in overwatch positions a mile or more distant. The tank destroyers would fire ranging shots, adjust for impact, then engage with rapid fire until the target was destroyed or withdrew. The German tanks, unable to locate targets at such extreme ranges and operating under the assumption that they were beyond American weapons range, were systematically destroyed. The Battle of the Bulge reached its crisis point in late December. German forces had achieved deep penetrations but failed to capture key objectives, particularly the vital road junction at Bastogne. American reinforcements poured into the salient from north and south. Among these reinforcements were additional tank destroyer battalions, many equipped with M36s. As weather cleared after December 23rd, allowing Allied air power to operate, the German offensive began to collapse. On January 3rd, 1945, German forces began withdrawing from their maximum penetration toward the German border. The withdrawal was conducted under heavy pressure from American and British forces. German armour, which had spearheaded the offensive, now fought desperate rearguard actions to allow infantry units to escape encirclement. M36 tank destroyers proved devastatingly effective in these battles. German Panthers and Tigers, attempting to hold blocking positions to cover the withdrawal, found themselves engaged by American tank destroyers at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. The long-range duels invariably favoured the Americans, whose M36s could take covered positions, fire, relocate, and fire again before German armour could effectively respond. Lieutenant Heinrich Müller commanded a Panther in the Müller, 9th SS Panzer Division during the withdrawal fighting in early January. His company had been tasked with holding a ridge line near the town of Haufalais to cover the retreat of infantry units. Müller positioned his Panther in a carefully selected hull-down position with excellent fields of fire. His crew had prepared the position the previous night, clearing brush to ensure unobstructed vision, marking range cards to key terrain features, stockpiling ammunition. By all standards of German armour doctrine, Müller had created an excellent defensive position. American forces advancing on Haufalais included elements of the 771st Tank Destroyer Battalion. The battalion commander, studying aerial reconnaissance photos and consulting with forward observers, identified the ridge where Müller's company was positioned. Rather than sending Sherman's forward into what was obviously a prepared defensive position, he deployed his M36s to firing positions on a parallel ridge approximately 1,500 yards distant. The range was extreme for armour combat, but the M36 crews were confident in their weapons. Müller first realized something was wrong when a tremendous impact struck the ground 15 meters in front of his position, throwing up a geyser of frozen earth. A ranging shot. He immediately recognized the danger. American tanks were engaging from long range, something only tank destroyers with heavy guns could do. But Müller's training had taught him that American tank destroyers needed to close to 500 or 600 meters to threaten his Panther's frontal armor. He calculated that he had time to identify the enemy positions and engage before they could adjust their fire. He was wrong. The second 90mm round struck his Panther's gun mantlet with tremendous force. The armor-piercing round penetrated the mantlet, a weak point in the Panther's otherwise formidable frontal protection, and entered the turret. The round killed Müller's gunner instantly and wounded the loader. Müller, stunned but functional, ordered immediate withdrawal. His driver, responding with practiced skill, put the Panther in reverse and backed down the rear slope of the ridge. Only then did Müller realize that of the 6 Panthers his company had positioned on the ridge, 3 were burning and 2 others were withdrawing with damage. That evening, writing his after-action report by candlelight in a freezing cellar in Haufalais, Müller tried to describe what had happened. American tank destroyers with extremely powerful guns had engaged his company at a range he had believed safe. The guns could penetrate Panther armor from distances exceeding 1,000 meters. His training had not prepared him for this. His tactical doctrine had no answer for enemies who could kill at ranges where his own excellent gun could not reliably hit back. Müller submitted his report through command channels, emphasizing the urgent need for information about these new American weapons. The report was filed, acknowledged, and had no practical effect on German tactical doctrine or intelligence assessments. This pattern repeated across the front as German forces withdrew from the Ardennes salient. American tank destroyer units, particularly those equipped with M36s, inflicted disproportionate casualties on German armor. The Germans were learning through painful experience about M36 capabilities, but the lessons came too late and spread too slowly to affect tactical outcomes. Each Panther company, each Tiger platoon, each tank battalion commander had to learn independently, through combat, that their assumptions about American anti-tank capabilities were fatally flawed. By late January 1945, as the Ardennes battle concluded, American forces had destroyed or captured vast quantities of German armor. Exact numbers remain disputed by historians, but conservative estimates suggest German forces lost over 600 tanks and assault guns during the offensive and subsequent withdrawal. Many of these losses were inflicted by M36 tank destroyers engaging at ranges German crews had considered safe. The 90mm gun had proven itself in the most demanding combat conditions imaginable. But for German tank commanders, the psychological damage exceeded the material losses. For 2 years, since the introduction of the Tiger and Panther, German armor forces had operated with confidence in their qualitative superiority. Individual German tanks were better armed, better armored, more capable than their Allied counterparts. German crews had known they were outnumbered, but had relied on superior technology and training to offset Allied numerical advantage. The M36 Jackson shattered this confidence. German tank commanders could no longer assume safety at extended ranges. They could no longer rely on their armor to protect them beyond typical engagement distances. The psychological warfare, the dimension of this intelligence failure, would persist through the remaining months of the war. In February 1945, Wehrmacht training commands finally began distributing updated intelligence assessments that included detailed information on the M36 Jackson. The assessments described the 90mm gun's capabilities, specified recognition features to distinguish M36s from other American tank destroyers, and recommended tactical countermeasures. But by February, German armor forces were shadows of their former strength. Fuel shortages limited training and operations. Replacement vehicles were scarce. Experienced crews had been decimated in the Ardennes fighting and earlier battles. The intelligence that might have made a difference in December was largely irrelevant by February. The final months of the war in Europe saw M36 tank destroyers continue their effective service. As American forces crossed the Rhine and drove into Germany, tank destroyer battalions provide crucial anti-armor capability. Crucial anti-armor capability, German, but the M36's 90mm gun gave American forces the capability to engage German armor at standoff ranges, reducing casualties and maintaining offensive momentum. The M36 Jackson represents a fascinating case study in how technological development, tactical doctrine, and intelligence failures intersect in warfare. The vehicle itself was a relatively simple adaptation of existing technology. The Sherman chassis was proven and reliable. The 90mm gun was adapted from anti-aircraft artillery. The open-topped turret was a weight-saving measure that also improved observation. None of these elements were revolutionary, but combined into a functional weapons system and deployed at a critical moment, they created a significant tactical advantage that German forces failed to counter because they never fully understood what they were facing. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.